I will no longer be involved in family ties that exist only on paper. With such a shocking statement escaping Grace's lips at the wedding speech, the room went ice cold. Normally, it would follow with, "Thank you, Dad and Mom, for raising me for 27 years." Paul, who was about to become Grace's husband, froze next to her. I, too, withdrew the tears I had been shedding until a moment ago and stared at Grace. Then, unable to hold back the laughter bubbling up from deep within, I burst into inappropriate laughter. All guests turned their eyes towards me, standing at the very back. That line is more fitting for me, don't you think? Unbothered by the guests' stares, I flashed Grace a challenging smile. "What? What do you mean?" Grace retorted with mockery. I finally stood up. "My name is Stella. I'm 60 years old and currently work for a foreign consumer goods company. There's a reason why I say currently. After graduating from college, I moved through numerous companies, having dreamed of working hard once I became an adult. I changed jobs every few years to advance my career. After getting a job at a consulting company, I sought new challenges in various companies rather than staying with one. Thanks to my fickle nature, my efforts were quickly recognized by my bosses, leading to promotions and substantial salaries at each company. Thus, at the foreign consumer goods company I currently work at, I have been making good progress, reaching top sales performance 3 years after joining. No woman has worked long and in various roles around my age, so promoting me seemed to enhance the company's reputation as a business that promotes women's career advancement. I'm now happily serving as the sales department manager. I have a very blessed life at work. My career-focused life took a turn towards family 15 years ago while working at a securities firm. That's where I met Kevin, my husband, who is 2 years my junior. Kevin had been working in the accounting department of a securities firm since high school graduation. His gentle nature wasn't suited for sales, but his precision made him perfect for accounting. I had the opportunity to visit the accounting department from time to time, and Kevin approached me there. Though I felt I was too old for romance, Kevin was serious. Attracted to his sincerity, I eventually fell for him and initiated our relationship. Kevin was surprised and then blushed. "Thank you. I feel the same way." Our pure-hearted exchange, albeit us both being in our 40s, led to laughter from us both. Our relationship flourished, and Kevin proposed within a year. "However, I actually have a daughter," he revealed. Despite my surprise, I expressed my desire to marry him if he and his daughter were agreeable. Kevin thought it over and then decided to introduce me to his daughter, Grace. When I first met Grace, she was a 12-year-old elementary school student. "Nice to meet you. I'm Stella," I greeted Grace with a smile, trying to be as non-threatening as possible. Grace returned the greeting with a smile. "Hello." Her response put me at ease. "See, Grace, you've got a mom now." "Yeah." Grace nodded in agreement to Kevin's words and happily went back to her room. I wondered if she wasn't scared. "No, she seems fine." I'm relieved. "I'm relieved too. Grace is so cute." I praised Grace. Kevin seemed pleased. I learned he had separated from his wife 5 years ago. It seemed being complimented on Grace, who he had been raising alone, made him feel good, which I understood. After Grace accepted me, we got married a month later. Our marriage settled into a routine where I worked late and Kevin got off on time and took care of home affairs. With Grace becoming a middle schooler next year, she could stay home alone for short periods. Kevin seemed to like housework, and I'm grateful because he does the laundry and cooking without complaining. I did my part around the house with cleaning and dishes within my capacity. People around us would say, "How lucky you are to have a husband who helps out." Our marriage got off to a smooth start. Grace was a bit shy around me at first, but that quickly faded and we became close enough to go out together. She wrote me letters on my birthday and even shared stories about boys she liked. Perhaps she longed for the female companionship and conversations she never had being raised by a single dad. I tried my best to be Grace's mom. However, our close mother-daughter bond began to unravel a while after Grace entered middle school. She hit her rebellious phase. Her friends were all mischief makers, getting into makeup and late-night outings, making their way of having fun more extravagant. Grace, mingling with such girls, spent her days having fun. which naturally led to her grades dropping in periodic tests. "Grace, don't you think you're going out a bit too much lately? If you keep this up, you might not even make it to high school." I warned Grace for the first time. Grace, taken aback by my scolding, retorted, "Huh? Why do I have to be lectured by a stranger like you?" It was the first time I heard such heartless words directed at me. A stranger? We were getting along just fine until recently. "I was just being polite. I had to be nice to you, or Dad would feel sorry." All the smiles Grace had shown me were fake. Realizing this filled me with frustration and helplessness. Grace continued to complain. "I thought about mentioning this before, but isn't your cooking bad? I want to eat Dad's cooking. Don't mix your laundry with mine. We're strangers after all." About everything I did, her criticisms were always delivered in Kevin's absence, revealing Grace's malicious nature. I considered discussing it with Kevin, but knowing he cared deeply for both his daughter and me, I knew it would sadden him. I didn't want to upset him or add to his worries, so I never brought it up to him. Grace's harassment escalated from verbal attacks to actions like removing important documents from my bag before work or finishing off a cake Kevin had saved for me. Her ability to charm everyone meant Kevin never noticed her tormenting me, making me dread even seeing Grace. The attacks from Grace, which only worsened over the years, continued for 15 years. She still acted sweet in front of Dad. As she grew into adulthood, her antics became more troublesome, like withdrawing money from our joint account or stealing my precious jewelry. When I was about to reach my breaking point, "I'm getting married, the wedding is next month," Grace announced. "Really? So suddenly?" At 27, Grace was at a reasonable age for marriage, but the abruptness of a wedding next month left me struggling to keep up. "What's wrong with sudden timing? Is everything in matters like this?" "Just so you know, I'll marry even if you oppose." Grace seemed uninterested in my opinion, quickly retreating to her room after merely informing me of her marriage. That night, I shared the news of Grace's upcoming marriage with Kevin. "What's this all about? I haven't heard anything. Bring Grace here right now," Kevin demanded in an unusually stern tone. So I called Grace back. "If you're getting married, introduce us to your fiancé. We'll talk about the wedding after that," faced with Dad's reasonable demand. "Yes," Grace meekly responded. A week later, as promised, Grace brought her fiancé over. "Nice to meet you. My name is Paul. I apologize for the late introduction." Paul bowed respectfully to Kevin and me. He seemed to be a public servant from what we heard. His sincere appearance and manner of speaking pleasantly surprised us, considering we had braced ourselves for someone entirely different. After chatting for a while with the four of us, Paul made remarks that put Grace in a favorable light in front of us, revealing his serious nature. "See? He's a good guy, right? It's okay to marry him, right?" Grace, leaning forward, was eagerly looking at Kevin, not me, pressing him for an answer. "Yeah, Paul seems like a good guy, and I have nothing against it. But what about you, Stella?" "I'm all for it." Although surprised by Grace's sudden announcement, I was actually pleased because I thought Grace getting married would mean she would move out of this house. Yay! Then the wedding is set for next month as planned. Sure. Grace left the house with Paul, both of them beaming with joy. I wondered if they planned to stay somewhere tonight. Paul and Grace seemed to have quite different personalities and capabilities for life, but I wondered what would happen after they got married. Anyway, being able to get away from Grace was the happiest thing for me. Since Grace introduced us to Paul, she has been away from home more often. I thought she was busy preparing for the wedding with Paul, but one day, I ran into Paul on the bus home from work. I had been working overtime for about 3 hours as usual, but the commuter bus was packed. "Oh, isn't it Paul? Just finished for today? Good evening?" "Yes, it's been busy lately." "Really? It's tough being a civil servant. By the way, how long has lately been?" "It's been like this for about a month now." "A month?" Hearing Paul's words, I suddenly became curious. It's been about a month since Grace started being away from home, but Paul has been having busy days every day. Then what exactly has Grace been doing and where? I suppressed my desire to ask Paul and went home. Grace didn't come home this day again. Something smelled fishy. It's been a month since I started suspecting something about Grace. Finally, the day of Grace and Paul's wedding arrived. Both Kevin and I couldn't help but reflect on everything up to this point, as it was our daughter's once-in-a-lifetime wedding. Kevin was moved to tears walking down the aisle with Grace in her dress. Thinking of Grace leaving my hands, I also cried, but for a different reason. However, to those around, it must have looked like a mom crying deeply over her daughter's wedding. The wedding and reception were a great success, and it was time for the highlight of the evening, the bride's letter to her parents. As Paul placed his hand on Grace's back, she began to read the letter. Kevin and I were, of course, crying again. I'd like to take this moment to say something to Mom. The beginning of the letter was unusual, and the audience was a bit restless. I will no longer be involved in family ties that exist only on paper. With such a shocking statement escaping Grace's lips at the wedding speech, the room went ice cold. Normally, it would continue with, "Dad, Mom, thank you for raising me for 27 years." Paul was frozen next to Grace. I, too, retracted the tears I had shed until then and stared at Grace. Unable to suppress the laughter rising from the pit of my stomach, I burst into inappropriate laughter. The guests all turned to look at me in the back. That's my line, you know. Ignoring the guests' gazes, I gave Grace a challenging smile. "What? What do you mean?" Grace replied mockingly. So, I finally stood up. As I walked from the back seat, I could hear the guests whispering about what was happening. The wedding staff seemed flustered in the corner of my vision, but I continued regardless. "You might not know, but I've been the one paying for your mobile phone and insurance bills, not Dad. When I heard you were getting married, I thought I no longer needed to pay for those, so I changed them to be deducted from your account." "What? What are you talking about?" Grace glared at me with the corners of her eyes lifted. I did exactly what I had just explained. Hearing that Grace was getting married, I thought my role was over, so I had arranged for the various expenses I had been paying on Grace's behalf to be taken care of without my intervention. Grace probably assumes that Dad is the main financial supporter of the household. However, the reality is different. I earn more than Kevin, so I have been the one paying for the house mortgage, the car loan, everything. It's just as I said, you've been playing the good daughter in front of Dad while bad-mouthing me behind my back. So when I heard you were getting married, I was genuinely happy. Finally, I could cut ties with you, just like you said. I don't want anything to do with a stranger who's only related by registry. The murmurs of guests whispering to each other reached my ears. Grace's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Paul, on the other hand, turned pale. "What are you talking about? That's a lie. There's no proof I've ever badmouthed you, you awful hag," Grace exclaimed and then clamped her mouth. Shut, as if realizing she had said too much. A decent person wouldn't use such words against their parent, would they? Caught in the act, Grace glared at me, tears welling up in her eyes. Seeing Grace like this, Paul began to tremble. "What are you saying to your own parent? I thought you were a nice, polite, cheerful girl, but I had no idea you were this twisted. This is marriage fraud. I'm calling off the wedding right now." Hearing Paul's furious declaration, Grace looked shocked. She must have never imagined her own words would trigger the cancellation of her engagement. She started to protest, as if wanting to say, "Stop, anything but that." "What are you talking about? I haven't told you yet, but I'm pregnant. It's only been 6 weeks, so you wouldn't have noticed. And you're saying you won't get married? That's irresponsible." The word pregnant stirred murmurs around us, but I was expecting it. Paul, however, showed no sign of being flustered by Grace's announcement. Grace, on the other hand, was confused by the unexpected reactions from me and Paul. What's the matter? Too shocked to respond? For the sake of the child, we have to get married, right? Grace wore a triumphant smile. It seemed she thought that bringing up the pregnancy would make Paul unable to refuse marriage. But Paul, with a somber face, said in a low voice, "Is that child mine?" "What?" Paul's expression darkened. I listened to Paul's words with bated breath. I always took precautions when we were intimate. You know that, right? And yet you boldly claim to be pregnant. Is that child really mine? Now it was Grace's turn to tremble. I seized the moment to speak up. No, it's not. I've heard that Paul has been busy this past month. But you, Grace, often came home late, or were gone the whole day despite only working part-time. There's no overtime in your job, so where and with whom were you wandering around? I edged closer to Grace, her expression twisted further. That was with friends. I have friends, you know. Grace's desperate reply made me unable to stop laughing. Friends? It's strange for friends to be arm in arm entering a hotel, don't you think? I thrust my mobile phone screen in front of Grace's eyes. In fact, since I began suspecting Grace, I had started an investigation into her infidelity. I couldn't bear the thought of honest Paul being deceived. I poured the money I earned into hiring a detective, and soon enough, evidence like this came to light. What is this? Bringing this up is just low. You're not a mother. I've never heard of a mother slandering her own daughter, Grace screamed through the microphone, causing everyone to cover their ears. Despite there being no room for excuses, Grace still refused to admit her guilt, which made her seem even more pitiable. I was about to speak again when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Stopping next to me was Kevin. I've been listening to the conversation, but what's going on here? Kevin's voice, low and seemingly coming from the depths of the earth, made Grace tremble. It was the first time I had seen the always gentle Kevin express anger like this. Dad, this is a misunderstanding. I haven't been unfaithful. How can you lie so calmly? You're about to get married and you have a child with another man that's not Paul. Stop joking around. Grace shivered at Kevin's stern voice. It's not just that. How can you speak to Mom like that after she's taken care of you for 15 years? I see you've been using such foul language towards Mom behind my back all this time. Mom has loved you like her own daughter, even though you're not related by blood. She's more competent at work than I am and earns more money. She's been the one paying for your education mostly, and yet you repay her kindness with ingratitude. I won't forgive that. It's not true. Dad, Mom is lying. Please believe me. I'm your daughter. Grace looked at Kevin with teary eyes, hoping for redemption, but Kevin quickly crushed that hope. Daughter? No, from today, you're not my daughter. My daughter wouldn't do such a cowardly thing. From today, we're cutting ties. Anyway, apologize to Mom, Paul, and everyone gathered here. I'm sorry, Grace apologized profusely, and then left the venue in her wedding dress. I saw a man among the guests hastily leave the venue after Grace, likely her affair partner. Inviting her affair partner to her own wedding was insanity. I was made painfully aware of how deranged Grace was. Paul, I'm truly sorry. Please allow me to apologize to the family members later. I should be the one apologizing for not noticing what Grace was really like. Even in what must have been the hardest moment for him, Paul's consideration for us showed he was truly a good and earnest person. Kevin and I went around apologizing to the guests, and the unprecedented wedding was thus brought to an abrupt end. After that, Grace left the house, or rather, Kevin told Grace, "Don't come back." Grace pleaded persistently, "I'm sorry. I've reflected on my actions. Please let me stay here." But Kevin did not forgive Grace, likely considering the 15 years of scorn she had directed at me. I thanked Kevin and vowed never to associate with Grace again. Grace reluctantly rented an old apartment in the countryside after being denied a return to our home. Her affair partner turned out to be a man with no capability for living, only working part-time twice a week and loafing around. Grace probably thought her marriage to this man would be opposed. Perhaps she planned to marry the earnest Paul to satisfy us and then find a reason to remarry her affair partner. While her true intentions are unknown, neither Kevin nor I could accept Grace after she hurt Paul and acted selfishly. Although Grace had a job, it was part-time, so she must be living at her financial limits. She must be struggling to pay for even her mobile phone and insurance bills I used to cover. The hardship she's facing now is a consequence of the good life she once had. Grace might have many desires, but likely none are being fulfilled. But this is the result of her own actions. I believe she should learn the hardships of living through struggle. Meanwhile, Kevin and I have been enjoying peaceful days together. Kevin chose me, his wife, over his biological daughter. Kevin says, "Of course. I truly respect you, Stella. Let's continue to support each other. I'm truly happy, and Kevin, who diligently takes care of household chores, is a wonderful husband. I feel nothing but gratitude for our happiness. We've actually continued to stay in touch with Paul. Paul, once depressed by Grace's betrayal, seems happy with a new girlfriend recently. Though we should have no relation to Paul anymore. He seems to like us and occasionally invites us out for meals like a family. I wish to watch over Paul's happiness from afar.